Sometimes I read on a website called alternativeright.com. They have some good stuff there. They have a lot of looniness. But what I want to address in particular is traditionalism's opposition to economics. Basically, they associate capitalism with democracy and liberalism, and they mean this in the leftist Gestalt sense, I think, not in the Manchester sense, though they frequently conflate the two. First of all, capitalism and democracy are, in practice, a contradiction. The people who talk about capitalist democracy are basically conflating neoliberalism and mercantilism and various sorts of interventionism with laissez-faire. Most of the things they attribute to capitalism are actually attributed to state interference. The fact is that there's no such thing as society without a cash nexus. It is impossible to organize production without prices, and any interference with the pricing mechanisms is just going to screw up production. People who say, well, there's more to life, or there's more to society, or politics, or what have you, than economics, are totally missing the point. There's much more to engineering than geometry, but if you try to do engineering without geometry, you're going to fuck up, and you're going to make stupid decisions and have stupid ideas. And this is pretty much what they have. These producerists, distributists, the red Tories that were recently in the United Kingdom, the corporatists, the fascisti and stuff like that, they have crank schemes. Their schemes make no economic sense, and they'd involve a huge regulatory bureaucracy, which is something a lot of them rail against. If people like the National Bolsheviks or the BNP ever got into power, they would do at least as bad as the present administrations would in regards to economic policies. As a matter of fact, when these quasi-traditionalist right-wing, pseudo-right-wing organizations do get into power, for example, Mussolini talked a lot about corporativism, and that's basically an idea where you organize labor and industry into different cartels and then have some sort of cartel-based industrial government. He didn't actually do this. He sort of made attempts at forming them. They had no power. What he really did was continue the previous democratic interventionist economic policies, which is kind of funny because you hear from Mises, for example, the economics of fascism, or you hear this idiot Jonah Goldberg talking about how progressives are fascists, but as a matter of fact, they're not. Fascists copy progressives. The National Socialists and fascists openly admired Woodrow Wilson's total state that he erected during the First World War, and it's just anachronistic to call fascism as its own economic movement and to talk about progressives being fascists. Fascists were progressives, if anything. Okay, so on the Property and Freedom Society that Hans Hoppe helped to found made a point of expelling the economic illiterates and the nationalists and so forth, like Pat Buchanan, because they're basically their schemes are not left-wing in the sense that they adopt a leftist gestalt, but they're basically the same as the left wing. They give it different names, but it would end up being the same thing. Now, there's a quote from Ludwig von Mises on traditionalism as an ideology from Human Action, Chapter 9, where he says, "Traditionalism is an ideology which considers loyalty to valuations, customs, and methods of procedure handed down or allegedly handed down from ancestors, both right and expedient. It is not an essential mark of traditionalism that those forefathers were the ancestors in the biological meaning of the term, or can fairly be considered such. They were sometimes only the previous inhabitants of the country, concerned or supporters of the same religious creed, or only precursors in the exercise of some special task. Who is to be considered an ancestor, and what is the content of the body of tradition handed down, are determined by concrete teachings of each variety of traditionalism. The ideology brings into prominence some of the ancestors and relegates others to oblivion. It sometimes calls ancestors people who had nothing to do with the alleged posterity. It often constructs a traditional doctrine which is of recent origin and is at variance with the ideologies really held by the ancestors. Traditionalism tries to justify its tenets by citing the success they secured in the past. Whether this assertion conforms with the facts is another question. Research could sometimes unmask errors in the historical statements of a traditional belief. However, this did not always explode the traditional doctrine, for the core of traditionalism is not real historical facts, but an opinion about them, however mistaken, and a will to believe things which the authority of ancient origin is attributed. That pretty much sums it up. I'm going to put some links to criticisms of traditionalist economics in the info bar.